For almost 40 years, there's been one case that has just haunted Taiwan's justice system. It's a story of incredible pain, of deep, persistent doubt, and a legal fight that honestly feels like it will never end. Today, we're diving into the case of Chu Ho-shun, a name that's now become shorthand for what many call a judicial stain. At the heart of this, you have two stories that simply cannot both be true. On one side, you have a family that has been waiting nearly 4 decades for justice after the murder of their son. On the other, you have a man who has been screaming his innocence from death row for just as long, longer than anyone else in Taiwan's history. Both sides want closure, but they've been stuck in this painful standoff for decades. So, how did we even get here? Well, we're going to start with the tragedy itself and then trace the path that led to a conviction. After that, we'll take a hard look at the really shaky evidence that's caused all this legal gridlock. And finally, we'll explore the very last option on the table, a pardon, and ask what this whole saga tells us about a deep wound in Taiwanese society. Okay, so let's go back to 1987. A 9-year-old boy named Liu Chang is abducted right after his cram school class. It was an event that just shocked the entire nation. His family did everything right. They even paid the ransom. But their son never came home. The boy's father, Lu Chinte, has said that losing his son is a wound that simply never heals. For him and his family, that pain is just as raw today as it was all those years ago. It's a constant presence that has defined their lives, and their search for justice has been absolutely relentless. And then, on the complete other side of this, you have the story of Chu Ho-shun. He was arrested when he was 28. He's now in his late 60s. He has spent most of his life in prison, under a death sentence. And through it all, even when admitting guilt might have gotten him a lighter sentence, he has never, ever stopped saying he's innocent. So how in the world did the state build its case against Chu Ho-shun? Well, the official story starts with a secret tip from a witness and ends with a finalized death sentence. Let's walk through exactly how that happened. So in 1988, the police bring in Chu and a whole group of co-defendants, and during those first interrogations, they confess. Chu even reportedly apologized directly to Liu Chang's father. Some of the others took police to a spot where they claimed they had disposed of the body. And based almost entirely on these confessions, Chu was sentenced to death in 1989. After a mind-boggling 23 years and 11 retrials, that sentence was made final in 2011. Okay, but this is where the story takes a sharp turn. This is why so many legal scholars look at this and call it a judicial stain. The entire foundation of the conviction, those confessions, and the way the evidence was handled has come under incredibly intense fire. So that brings us to the crucial question at the heart of all this controversy. Was the evidence really strong enough to send a man to his death? Well, according to countless legal experts who've reviewed this case, the answer is a hard no. I mean, just look at this list. This is where the state's case truly falls apart. First off, the confessions were allegedly gotten through torture. We're talking beatings, waterboarding with chili water, things so brutal that the police officers involved were actually convicted for it later. The key piece of evidence, the ransom audio tape, the prosecution lost it. And then you have the basics of any murder case. The victim's body was never found, the murder weapon was never found, the fingerprints on the ransom note, not a match. On top of all that, Chu had an alibi with the receipt and witnesses. And get this, think about that ransom call. The government's own voice print expert, the guy who first said the voices were similar, later got on the stand, under oath, and testified that they were not the same. I mean, that kind of reversal from an expert witness, that should have been a game changer. It should have stopped everything in its tracks. But somehow, in this case, it didn't. Now let's talk about the law, because this point is absolutely critical. Under international human rights law, which, by the way, Taiwan has made part of its own domestic law, a confession you get through torture is not evidence, period. It's inadmissible in court. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is crystal clear. So the alleged torture here isn't just a moral problem. It's a fundamental legal flaw that pulls the rug out from under the entire prosecution. And look, this isn't just the defense lawyer's opinion. In 2019, a panel of international legal experts set up a mock human rights court just to review this case, and their verdict? It was completely unambiguous. Taiwan had violated its international obligations by using those coerced confessions and by denying Chu Ho-shun a fair trial. So you're probably asking yourself, if the evidence is this weak, and international experts have condemned the whole process. Why is Chu Ho-shun still on death row? Well, the answer is a judicial deadlock that seems impossible to break. Just take a second to absorb this timeline. Arrested in 1988. His sentence wasn't even finalized until 2011. And now, here we are in 2024, and as Taiwan's own constitutional court is debating the death penalty itself, this case is just this giant elephant in the room. And the reason for this deadlock is that inside the Taiwanese judicial system, every single door has been slammed shut. Every request for a retrial, every single extraordinary appeal, even ones filed by the prosecutor general himself, has been rejected by the courts. The system, for all its chances to review, has been unable to fix its own massive potential mistake. So with the courts basically saying no more, advocates have turned to the one last option available, a power that exists completely outside the judicial system. And that brings us to the presidential pardon. Okay, it's really important to understand the difference here. A retrial is a court process. The whole point is to prove someone is innocent and get that guilty verdict thrown out. But you need new, decisive evidence, and in a case this old, that's incredibly hard to find. A pardon, on the other hand, is an act of executive power. It doesn't say you're innocent, it says your punishment is forgiven. So the conviction technically stays on the books, but you walk free. In a case like this, where the courts are just stuck, a pardon is seen as the only tool left to fix what could be a terrible injustice. And this isn't just a local campaign. The pressure for a pardon is coming from all over the world. We're talking UN treaty reviewers who monitor Taiwan's human rights record, groups like Amnesty International. They have all repeatedly urged Taiwan's president to use this power and finally resolve this case. You know, this whole thing is about so much more than just one man's fate. It has left this deep, unhealing wound on society because it exposes some really serious structural problems in the justice system that could affect anyone. This quote from the victim's own brother, Lu Ting, is just so incredibly powerful. He's talking about the pain of both families, and he shifts the focus away from just punishment and towards real reform. He's asking, what can we learn from this so that it never happens again? And that question gets right to the heart of this case's devastating legacy. And that really is the bottom line. That's why people call this a judicial stain. It's this ugly mark that makes you question the integrity of the whole system. It shows these huge weaknesses in everything from how evidence is handled to how interrogations are conducted, and most critically, the system's failure to admit when it might have gotten something terribly, terribly wrong. So this is where we're left. One horrific crime, two completely shattered families. One family lost their son forever. The other lost theirs to the prison system for a lifetime. When a case reveals flaws this deep, the final question isn't just about guilt or innocence anymore. It's about how an entire society can possibly begin to heal a wound like this, and how it can restore faith in the very system that's supposed to deliver justice for everyone.